Well, hello everybody and welcome to another video tutorial. My name is Peter Drakulic, and in this video tutorial I would like to show you how you can fake global illumination or GI inside Blender internal without, please pay attention to this, without using ambient occlusion. So although we have now cycles render, which is a great render, you can have some shaders that Blender internal cannot duplicate or cannot create. Using Blender internal for some scenes like this one with simple materials and some more complex maybe materials. And by the way, I hope you can see down here the reflections of this semi-wet floor here. Alright, so I hope that I'm gonna be showing you how to create those reflections using a stencil texture and a composite material, all inside the Blender internal renderer using node editor and things like that. But that in a future tutorial, hopefully soon. For now, although we have cycles now in Blender, and cycles is a great renderer, you might need to render some scenes like this one using Blender internal and faking global illumination. Why? Because first, it is fun, because you can adjust all the parameters and you can take the result that you want, exactly the lighting you want for your scene. Second, because it's faster, you can save a lot of rendering time by using Blender internal. And third, because it is a great exercise for you to learn how to light a scene using the old way, not relying on the global illumination renderers. If you have a global illumination renderer, though, it's better, but you have to know how to light your scene the way you want. So, without further ado, let me show you this simple render that I have made of a kitchen scene. Inside here, you can see. I hope you can see the bouncing of light that is going on some surfaces. So, for example, if I zoom in here, you can see that the wall is a little bit yellowish, greenish color. So you can see this reflected over here on the shelf here, on the top shelf, because of a light that I have added, an area light that gives this effect of color bleeding, as we call it, if I'm not mistaken. So I hope you can see now here a reddish color that has this tablecloth here, and this is due to the bounce off of the light on the surface of this red chair here. The same goes for here, and of course this light is being, we have a bounce or color bleeding, if you prefer, color effect down here on the floor. Of course, I'm exaggerating a little bit with the color because I know you are watching through video now, but you can adjust this in a more realistic way for yourself later on. Also, I hope you can see, if I zoom in here, you can see the bouncing light from the fridge here. Alright, I have added some lights as well here, and here around the stove and somewhere here, because of the very specular, very reflecting, very polished, surface. It bounces off some light. So the important thing for you to remember is that you can get some pretty realistic results, okay, at a fraction of time. For example, the scene that contains about 30 different lights in the scene, but don't get overwhelmed by the amount of lights, by the amount of about 30 lights in the scene, because as you are going to see, and as you gain some experience in creating your own lighting solution, you're going to discover that it's going to be a matter of hours to set, or even less maybe, to set your own lighting solution. And the payoff is great because you are going to have much less render time. So If you know how indirect lighting works, you can very well simulate the global illumination lighting effect. So, without further ado, let me start with our tutorial. Well, let me take you for a quick tour now inside my scene, so you can see this symbol, how the lights have been arranged in my scene. So if I switch over to the wireframe mode by pressing Z, and if I go down here to the select button and select all by type lamp, you can see that in green you can see all the lamps that are found inside my scene. And there are about 30 lights inside my scene. You can see them listed over here in the outliner, but don't get overwhelmed because they are each and every one of them has a different function inside my scene. So that's why I have grouped them in different groups, in different categories. So let me switch from over here in the outliner to the groups view, so I can show you better what I'm talking about. So before going further, though, I would like to emphasize on the naming of the lamps. Each time you are dealing with scenes that have a big amount of elements, either objects or other like models and things like that, or lamps and things like that, then you want to give to those elements distinctive names. So naming them should be your top priority, otherwise that would be difficult for you even just to find and select one of them. So I'm emphasizing on naming properly those objects there. Personally, my naming convention is that I give first the name lamp, then the type of lamp, like area here, then the function of the lamp. Alright, so I have grouped them into 6 groups. Alright, and the first group is what I call lamps direct light. As you might know already, light in Blender internal works without taking into account any bouncing off on the surfaces. So the light rays are traveling towards one direction, they don't come back. Alright, that's very important. So if I want it, let's say, to fake, to mimic the bouncing off the surface, I need to add an extra light. So, but before getting there, those lamps direct light, in our scene we have just one, this lamp main, and let me head over to this properties panel for the lamp. You can see that those lights, those lamps, are those that are indeed real world lamps that should be the light sources, the real light sources inside my scene. For example, this could be the lamp on the ceiling of my room. So you might also have some other light sources, alright, around the room. For those lamps, you need to activate the ray shadow option if they are area lights, or in general the shadow option if they are point lights or spotlights and things like that. So we need to keep this in mind. Alright, but those lamps, they cannot mimic the bouncing of the surfaces. So that's why I have also added another category that I might have named as lamps area wall bounce. So let me select this group from over here, the outliner. You can see we have 6 big area lamps, one for each and every one of the walls or the floor and the ceilings of my room. Alright, so for those lamps there, let me unfold this category. So I have 6 big area lamps. Right, let me select one of them, let's say this one. So for those lamps, I need to set a low energy distance values, and I need to deactivate the shadows. We don't need shadows. Those are just for adding light on the walls or the floor or the ceiling on the big surfaces. So deactivate the shadow, no shadow option, and then deactivate the specular as well. So we don't need for those lamps to have specular property. So let me select another one so I can show you this that simulates the bouncing off on the floor from the light that comes from the ceiling, all right, and things like that. So again, just diffuse, no specular, no shadow. Okay, now the next big category of light I want to talk to you about are what we call the lamps area GI. All right, so I'm selecting this group, and in green here you can see all those area GI lamps. Those lamps with small areas of your room where you need to add some more light. So if you think, depending upon how you imagine the traveling of the rays bouncing off the surfaces, that a certain small area of your room needs some more, a touch up of light, you know, adding some more light, then you need to add some, what I call GI lamps there. Alright, let's now go to the properties panel for one of those lamps. Let me select one of those lamps. Let's say this one. Alright, this one, as you can see, I have no shadow enabled, and I have no specular. So I don't need specular shadow, I just need diffuse. So those lamps here might have sometime the color of the surface that they are faking the bounce off. Let me explain you better what I mean. This lamp is setting light on the stove, hence the name, GI stove. So because of the greenish wall though, you might consider to give it a light green color. So it adds a little bit of color bleeding as well on this side of the stove. Alright, on this side of the stove. So you need to keep the energy and distance value fairly low, alright, and in general you don't want to give them other color than the color of the main light source of your scene. So let me select another light, GI area light, this one. This is casting some light onto this area here, and you don't need to be extremely, physically correct. You just want to get the result you are going for. So if you think you need to get to add some light in this very dark area of your scene, go ahead and add a GI area lamp. But don't forget, no shadow, no specular for those lamps there. So now let me fold this category. The next category of the next group of lamps I want to talk to you about are the so-called negative lamps. So the negative lamps, actually they don't cast light, they cast shadow. Why should you use such lamps? Well, if you remember before, I just said you that those big wall bounce areas, they are casting light, alright, but they don't have any shadow option enabled. So let's say the ceiling wall, the ceiling bounce area lamp, that one on top, is casting light toward the floor, but it doesn't have any shadow option, so I need to add an artificial shadow here, and I am doing so by adding what I call negative shadow or negative lamps. Okay, so underneath just under the table, so you can give some more contrast in the area under the table. For those lamps, you want to enable the negative option from over here. You want usually to constrain their influence in the layer where you want. So enable this layer only option as well. And also you want to enable the sphere option if you need to limit their effect, their shadow, alright, effect inside the limits of a sphere. So check sphere here and set the distance, alright, enable sphere, and that's it. So next category of lamps I want to talk to you about are the color bleeding lamps. What are those color bleeding lamps? Well, as you might know already, in global illumination, when the light is bouncing off a colored surface, it brings some color tint on the surface of any nearby objects. So those lamps mimic or fake that very effect. So for those lights, and let me unfold this color bleeding category and select one light. Let me say, let's say that one. All right. As you can see, I have here my red chair. So as the light is hitting the surface of the chair and is bouncing off towards the tablecloth, for example, the nearby objects, it is carrying a certain amount of reddish tint. So this is what we call color bleeding usually. So for that purpose, I have added a color bleeding lamp. All right, and I have added quite a few of them just underneath the chair here. I have given, because of the color of the chair, I have given them a bright red color, low energy, keep the energy fairly low. Usually you want them to belong to a certain layer, so you want to enable the this layer only option just to have the effect where you want, all right, and isolate their influence from the other objects of your scene. Also, we don't want for them to be specular. So those are the color bleeding lamps, and another example could be here in the stove, for example. I want to find a lamp somewhere here, let's say maybe that one, yes. So that lamp here is mimicking the bouncing off of the surface of the polished surface of the stove towards the floor. So we need for it to give it a rather bright bluish color or white color, low energy distance, this layer only, and also uncheck, deactivate the specular and the shadow options. We don't want any shadows for those color bleeding, as we call them, lamps. Next category is the lamps specular only, and those lamps, you can see we have just one in our scene, and if I unfold this group here and I select the lamp, those lamps, they don't have diffuse, they just have specular property, but not diffuse property. They also don't have shadow as well. Why should you use those lamps? Because you want to add some more specular highlights on certain objects. For example, this lamp here sets specular, just specular highlights, but it doesn't light it doesn't light those chairs, but it adds some specular highlights on those chairs and the tablecloth. So let me show you the rendering. So those specular highlights in the rendering are made possible thanks to these specular only lamps. So for those lamps, you want to have enabled this layer only option usually, because you don't want this lamp to cast specular highlights on everywhere around, but just to those objects that belong to the same layer with the lamp. So this layer only, specular, no diffuse, no shadow. So that was a quick overview of the different types of lamps that I have used in my scene. Again, I want to emphasize on the importance of using your own lighting solution. I do believe that a good lighting artist should be able to create his or her own lighting solution instead of relying on the ready-made solutions given by the physically based global illumination renderers. So even if you have a global illumination renderer available like Cyclos and things like that, it's a good exercise for you to start lighting your scenes using your own lighting solutions in the old way, like the old days. And if you do so, you will get some better results also when using the physically based renderers. So the main categories of lights are the direct light. The direct lights are the light sources that are really indeed inside the scene we are working with. the bounce of the big area lights that are just behind the big walls, the lamps area GI that are small area lights, area lamps or other kind of lamps that are adding some light on at very specific places of our scene. And then we have the color bleeding lamps that add some color tint to the nearby objects due to the bouncing off of the light on colored surfaces. And then we have the negative lamps that are actually they are absorbing light, they are casting shadow, used for making for getting some good contrast or adding some shadows here and there artificially. All right, and then we have the specular only lights that are adding only specular highlights, and we use them for getting a more, a better result considering the specular highlights of our scene. So that concludes our tutorial for today. Again, try for yourself, and you'll see that as you're gaining more experience, it's gonna be just a matter of few hours for you to find your own lighting solution that suits to your needs. So that concludes our tutorial for today. I hope you enjoyed it and learned something from this. If you like this tutorial, don't forget to subscribe. See you next time with a hopefully interesting topic, hopefully soon. Until then, have fun and goodbye.